Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 28 is finally out. The power of the double-edged sword has awakened. The dark future of Himawari and Eida is finally revealed. INOJIN'S new technique has surpassed all his predecessors. Mamushi triggers Boruto to activate Momoshiki's karma. No intro, no speculation, let's begin. I'm Nim without the E, and I'd really appreciate it if you guys could help hype up this video. Love you all. So yeah, the chapter opens with Sumire hugging Boruto's sword as the cover image, and the title for chapter 28 is New Power. The scene starts by showing Inojin training intensely to master his new jutsu with Kashin Koji as his mentor. But just like Inojin's determination and confidence before, he didn't need 2 days. With just 1 day, he completely mastered his new technique. Even Boruto himself, seeing how quickly Inojin grasped the jutsu, was genuinely impressed by Inojin's genius. However, at this point, the omnipotence that rewrote Boruto's reality is still a personal problem. In other words, Inojin states that he's here for Konoha and for Himawari. He still can't forgive the betrayal, but this also means he has accepted Boruto as a teammate. But hearing that response, Boruto did not react emotionally like a criminal. Instead, he said that this should open Inojin's mind. Especially if Inojin made Himawari cry even once, Boruto threatened to shave his head bald. And if you then see how Inojin responds, especially his expression of confusion and not understanding Boruto's words, I have a brief explanation. But this is not speculation or theory. In short, when Inojin triggered Boruto, he definitely expected Boruto to respond in a dark, harsh, or even seriously threatening manner. This is because in the minds of the Konoha citizens, including Inojin himself, Boruto is a traitor who killed Naruto and Hinata, as Kawaki accused him of doing. However, in fact, Boruto's response was completely beyond expectations. This means that at this point, Inojin began to realize that Boruto was not acting like a criminal. His tone was not like that of a bad guy, but rather like a threat from a friend. Or, perhaps more accurately, a threat from an older brother who knows that his younger sister is liked by a man. And of course, with Inojin feeling fused because Boruto's behavior doesn't match the image Kawaki planted in the entire village, especially after Boruto was framed for destroying the Uzumaki family, this interaction becomes really important because it shows that Boruto is slowly starting to be seen for who he really is by the people who once believed he was evil, even though he wasn't. Yeah, like Konohamaru himself, who boldly defended Boruto in front of the Konoha elders because he saw that Boruto's actions were not at all like those of someone with evil intentions. On the other hand, after Konohamaru's interrogation is over and he is allowed to continue his duties, it is now Mitsuki's turn. However, because Sai sensed that something felt off, he tried to trace Konohamaru's recent communication history. But unfortunately, after the sensor unit conducted a full check, the results came up empty, and there were no indications of what Sai had suspected. Lord Kobu's interrogation of Mitsuki began with a sentence that annoyed him quite a bit, referring to Mitsuki as the son of the infamous Orochimaru. But before we know what the rest of the interrogation between Mitsuki and Lord Kobu was about, the scene shifts to Boruto with his sword, which had been repaired and upgraded so quickly after he asked Sumire to do so. Based on the conclusion of the dialogue, especially the explanation about this sword, first, the sword's material is still the same. However, its shape has been changed to increase its strength and cutting ability. Sumire did not make any changes to the handleguard, but the rest has been totally remade. Second, this sword now has an automatic system. In other words, the sword can now automatically maintain the Uchiha Hagoromo jutsu after he grips the hilt and activates the jutsu just once. So, simply put, this will allow Boruto to fight without having to think about activating the sword's jutsu continuously. Third, this sword is capable of absorbing Boruto's chakra, but only in small amounts. The purpose is to keep the Hagoromo jutsu running continuously. This also means that the sword works without causing Boruto to lose focus as long as his chakra does not run out. Fourth, as a preventive or security measure, Sumire made the sword able to absorb the chakra of anyone whose chakra is not registered when they touch the sword, even in large amounts. It also causes anyone who holds the sword to lose all of their chakra. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a security system to prevent the sword from being stolen or used by enemies. Fifth, in this case, Sumire has registered the chakra of Boruto, Sasuke, and Sumire herself. So simply put, they are safe if they use or even just hold the sword. This is especially true for Sumire herself, so that she can continue to improve or modify the sword in the future. Lastly, with the sword's features and special abilities, there must be a special material inside it. However, before we know the details, the scene shifts to the Hokage's office. And as you can see, it seems like there is a dialogue that has been skipped. Because if we look at the dialogue between Shikamaru and Shikadai, the conversation immediately leads to the topic of the Divine Tree's attack on Konoha. But if we continue to the next dialogue, it is certain that this is about a strategy that Shikamaru got from Kashin Koji to deal with Mamushi, and Shikadai, who will be a member of the operation. And this dialogue has at least a few important points. First, Shikadai gives a less than ideal response after learning that his father is working with Boruto, a criminal ninja who killed Naruto. Second, because Shikamaru is currently the Hokage, he emphasizes that this is not a matter of forgiveness or something that is appropriate or inappropriate for a Hokage to do. In other words, since he swore an oath to himself when he accepted the position of Hokage, he will stick to his principles in any situation. And that is clearly what Naruto did. And of course, that belief is something he believes is the best way to protect Konoha, even if he has to bear the burden of pressure from the village or the elders of Konoha, if in the end he is proven to be affiliated with Kashin Koji, or even Boruto himself. Because at this point, Boruto's cooperation in fighting the Divine Tree is something that is very necessary and important. Even if Shikadai thinks it's something unreasonable, Shikamaru, as a father and also the Hokage, does not force his son to be involved in this operation. But one thing is certain, Shikamaru asks that all discussion of this topic be kept secret. Third, knowing that this operation involves several of Shikadai's own friends, like Himawari and even Sarada, who wants to become stronger so she can help Boruto, which Shikadai thinks is foolish, plus the fact that Chocho and Inojin also won't let Himawari fight alone, Shikadai decides that he will carry out the Hokage's orders as a shinobi who is ready to risk his life, even if he has to set aside his personal feelings toward Boruto. And yeah, for the next scene, we switch to the hideout where Inojin and Kashin Koji are talking to each other. In this case, Inojin, who already knows that Kashin Koji knows so much about what will happen in the future, especially about Inojin himself, says that it would be better to explain in detail rather than give incomplete information. But as an analogy, Kashin Koji asks a very crucial question. In other words, if Inojin had known beforehand that he would die fighting Jura for Himawari, would he still have fought? Of course, the answer is doubt and even frozen in fear. And as a result, if Inojin had not died at that moment, Himawari's power would not have awakened. This means that no matter how little Kashin Koji says and tells someone about the future he sees, there is a possibility that the future will change to some degree. So, the more ideal a future is, the better it is if not many people know about it. Because in essence, the actions of singularities of fate like Kashin Koji, who knows the future, often significantly influence how the future develops, whether in a good or bad way. So as more people become singularities, the future will branch out even more and become increasingly complex. And if that happens, the future will become extremely difficult to predict, ultimately nullifying the advantage of Jippo or prescience entirely. At this point, Kashin Koji has conveyed what he considers to be very important, and he can only entrust it to Shikamaru and Boruto. Then, as you can see, a rather terrifying scene unfolds. Himawari dies and Eida turns into a tree. At the very least, to prevent this fate from happening, Kashin Koji, through Inojin, intends to change this terrible future. Then, in another scene, we return to Konoha. At this moment, through a transmission ability that connects Shikamaru with several selected people, Shikamaru has determined that everyone who hears his voice is involved in this operation, starting with Eida, Sarada, Daemon, Chocho, Himawari, Konohamaru, Mitsuki, Delta, Kawaki, Sumire, and also Boruto. They are all the chosen ones. However, if we look at Amato, who is certainly in the same frame, I think he is also involved. Is that right? In short, everyone chosen was selected based on two main reasons. First, they are not hostile toward Boruto in regard to the upcoming battle. And even though Konoha still sees Boruto as an enemy who must be captured or killed, Shikamaru has predicted that there will be attempts to hinder Boruto during this operation, which will impede his actions. So while staying alert against the enemy, each of you will also support Boruto within the village. And for the second reason, it relates to transmission, or in simpler terms, communication. In other words, this dedicated line was created by Inojin through his new jutsu, the mind transmission formation, or in the original Japanese, Shindenjin. Regarding the enemy moving towards Konoha named Mamushi, who has the ability to split into multiple individuals and erase his own chakra markings, making his position difficult to track by the sensor team, Inojin's role with his new jutsu is crucial at this critical moment. In short, the jutsu they use is a different version of the mind transmission. The difference is that everyone connected can function as a receiver. They can sense the unique vibrations, frequencies of every object around them. Since Mamushi also emits a specific frequency, they plan to identify its frequency and then accurately track Mamushi's position to capture or even kill it. In other words, they create a human sensor network to detect and locate Mamushi through its vibration frequency. And in conclusion, mind transmission has a limit on the number of people who can be linked. As an alternative, Shikamaru and Inojin will detect the location and number of enemies, then send the information to all members. So with that, the team was chosen according to the limits of the jutsu, with Shikamaru and Inojin directing the entire operation. And as the core of this strategy, Shikamaru proceeds by explaining Mamushi's strength, abilities, and the method to deal with it. But before Shikamaru could explain all of that, Mamushi had already appeared in the middle of the Hidden Leaf village. Its arrival was completely unexpected and even faster than Shikamaru anticipated, a clear example of a future or fate that, according to Kashin Koji, has begun to start shifting. And as we also know, because this mission is a step to protect Eida, at this point she is quite panicked. But of course, given the outcome of the future we saw earlier, Daemon as a knight will not let the enemy touch his sister. And even though Sarada took the initiative to help, Shikamaru asked her to wait. In other words, Shikamaru divided the team into several groups to spread out based on predetermined locations where Mamushi would appear. On the other hand, with Mitsuki still being interrogated, Shikamaru will think of a special strategy so that Mitsuki can get out of there without provoking them for no reason. And as we can see, Mamushi was carrying out his mission exactly as Juro wanted, without causing any damage or anything like that. Even when the Konoha villagers couldn't answer his questions, Mamushi didn't kill them or anything, but instead looked for other clues about Eida's location. But at the same time, Boruto suddenly appeared and instantly slashed Mamushi, destroying his eyes and body. Then, the battle was finally inevitable. With his technique and the power of his sword, Boruto managed to cut down every Mamushi that split itself. However, because Mamushi had the ability to split itself into many bodies, Boruto was attacked from behind and thrown backwards. And when Mamushi tried to attack with his fire technique, Boruto was forced to use his karma to absorb the jutsu, which means this becomes the closing part of chapter 28 with Boruto using his karma for the first time. And as I said from the beginning, Boruto's abilities and strength are a double-edged sword, which aligns with the text written by the narrator at the end of the panel. To destroy the Divine Tree Man, Boruto risks his entire life. But what will the final outcome be? Unfortunately, we'll have to wait until December 18th. And yeah, to analyze the most important parts in greater depth and also some other key sections, I think will continue in the next video. So, thank you for watching. I'm Nim without the E. See you in the next video. Bye-bye. Data bio.